Now, as President Trump gets ready to set the agenda for his second year in office, his State of the Union is tonight. Many are also taking stock of the state of his relationship with the news media, which has not always been good, to say the least. CBS News legend Bob Schieffer has a new book out that talks about media in the 21st century. It's called Overload: Finding the Truth in Today's Deluge of News. Very good read. He recently was at Tulane University to talk about his book. In it, he discusses the explosion of fake news. That's a term often used by President Trump. Actually, it's a term he says he kind of invented, as well as the challenges of the 24-hour news cycle, the changes to the financial side of the news business, and many other things. We got a chance to talk to him before his speech at Tulane about the book and the state of journalism in today's world. You know, from the time when you got in the business and a little later when I got in the business, I mean, things have changed so much. I mean, we've gone from film to video to digital, from newspapers, you know, ruling the news, to where we are now, where it's the internet.
But you know, one constant in how we communicate is change. It's always changing, and we're always catching up with the technology that we have. We are now in the midst of a technology revolution that is having as profound an impact on our culture as the invention of the printing press had on the people of that day.
Are you optimistic? Because we're losing newspapers left and right. Newsrooms around the country are changing so much because corporate has taken over, and it seems to be more interested in the dollar than the delivery of news sometimes.
Well, what's happened is that the advertising revenue that newspapers use to hire the staff that did the great reporting, investigative reporting and all of that, it's gone away to the internet.
Because people aren't reading them.
And, well, I mean, it's gone away to the internet, and there's no money coming into these newspapers. They can't find a business model to operate and hire the staff to do what they used to do. And this is where the real crisis is in journalism. We've lost 126 newspapers in the last 12 years. They have no place to get the news, and a lot of times what they're doing is getting most of their news on social media, which is a great way to keep up with your family and friends and all of that. But we have to recognize that just because something pops up on Facebook doesn't mean it's been vetted in the way that news was generally vetted by the media that we used to have when I came into it and you came into it.
I would say
what we have now.
Close to 90% of the stuff you see on Facebook is of a dubious nature.
Well, and
I mean, it's become the National Enquirer in some ways.
Well, but also dubious by design in many cases, because now we're finding that the Russians have come in and, disguising themselves as domestic websites, are putting this stuff out that Facebook had said the other day that perhaps 126 million Americans have been exposed to content that came from Russian websites, and these things are unbelievable.
Matt, and with the internet, I mean, we have more access to information than we've ever had in our
the history
lives.
of the world.
And we seem to have less actual real knowledge.
Well, because we're overwhelmed. We're overwhelmed with so much information.
Or overloaded.
Yeah, that's why we named the book Overload. The problem is we have no curators anymore. It used to be there, you know, 3 or 4 television stations in every town. Most towns had 1 newspaper, some had 2, and that's where we got our news. And while we didn't always agree with the editorial policy, perhaps, we generally acknowledged that what was on the front page was true, that they had gone to the trouble to check it out and they didn't print it or broadcast it unless it was true. Well, now we have, what is it, about 700 channels on the television. We have more websites than that on the web.
Yeah.
And all this stuff is just pouring in 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And there's no way to sort it out.
And with all this, I was surprised. You still seem rather optimistic about the news business.
Well, I am, because there are some good things going on. I mean, the Washington Post, which has what every newspaper wishes it has a billionaire who bought the paper.
Right.
But what they have done is totally reinvented themselves. And instead of just being a newspaper, they are putting out their news product on just maybe 5 or 6 different platforms. They're putting heavy emphasis on the digital. And while the newspaper has 400,000 circulation, sometimes in a month they'll reach as many as 70 million people.
And they do a lot to fact check some of the stories.
Absolutely.
And try to debunk
and they
a lot
do
of stories.
some great reporting. I mean, both the Times and the Post did remarkable reporting during this last campaign under very difficult circumstances. But you know, somebody asked Marty Barron, how do you how do you respond when Donald Trump is president? He said, we do our job. He said, that's what we do. And the job of the media, of newspapers, of all of us, is not to run the country. It's not to you know, try to be the opposition party, as some in the White House would have us. It is simply to understand the politicians deliver a message. Our job is to check it out and find out if it's true. And if we do that, then we're performing a crucial service to democracy. You can't have our kind of democracy without a free and independent press, because our job is to give citizens independently gathered information that they can compare to the government's version of events. And then they can decide what to do about it.
Bob's book, Finding Truth in Today's Deluge of News, is available at all local bookstores and online. There are 2 local connections to the book as well. As co-author, Andrew Schwartz is a Tulane graduate, and another member of the book team, Lucy Boyd, is a graduate of the Academy of Sacred Heart. And first of all, one of the things he pointed out, he said the thing in the Washington Post where real journalism matters, it's true, and that is such a true statement. And you know, you're allowed, especially when you're reading the internet, you're allowed to have your own opinion. Mm-hmm. You're not allowed to have your own facts.
That's right. And you know, the thing is that what he said is so true, that a free and independent press and news organizations, that's critical to the democracy, because the first thing that happens when a dictator takes over, shuts down the media.
And the book's a good read for journalists and everybody else. It really is a good read.